affect the war on terror negatively
interesting.
on
Okay.
the West?
Well, Oliver, let me put the first part to Ariel Dorfman and ask about that. Is it the repetition of the phrase or the actual content that allows someone to be so convincing when it comes to using words?
Well, you know, I think that the use of those words by these totalitarian regimes is not only in the incantation of the word itself, but it has to do with the fertile ground where it happens. There is, for instance, a great deal of desire for security and stability, and that's what dictators play to all the time. They always play with fear. So I don't think it's only the repetition of the words. What's nice about art is that art doesn't repeat words. It invents words constantly. It's always imagining a different parallel reality, and that's where its enormous strength comes from, and that's where I think also we have this tremendous pressure on artists. That's why artists are always exiled. They're jailed, as many other people are. I mean, our Libyan friend certainly explained that very, very clearly. Very often artists, in fact, they're persecuted, but very often at least we know about their fate. We don't know about the fate about the peasants and the workers and the students. They're just thrown away and neglected and forgotten. And very often the writer becomes the person who can write about that, can tell those stories. We're really storytellers, and I think all three of us have lived that experience of the extraordinary strength of the story that is told. And that story is told, either it's told or retold, and that is a repetition, which is much stronger than the incantation, the enchantment of a Hitler or of a Gaddafi.
Well, Ahdas Suef, let me ask you to take the second part of Oliver's question, the issue of whether or not you think there might be a better or worse cooperation between the East and the West now that we're seeing the change in the Arab regimes, especially when it comes to the so-called war on terror.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is unpackage the question. He uses the terms the war on terror, and then he talks about intelligence sharing. So first of all, what is exactly this war on terror? I think that's a big question, and everybody would agree on that. And then intelligence sharing. Now, if we look at an aspect of the cooperation between Egypt and the West, specifically the United States, in the so-called war on terror, we come up with extraordinary rendition. So basically, Egypt, becoming a place of choice for prisoners flown over from the United States to be tortured. I would hope that these practices would completely end. And I think that this is a large part of what the Egyptian people want, that their country should stop being used to implement strategies and to implement policies that are inimical to the region, to the country, and to our moral and social well-being. Because of course, if you become a center for torture at the behest of the United States, then the filter down effect means that torture becomes endemic and systemic in society, which is what we have experienced. And so I think this whole thing of cooperation in the war on terror is going to need to be rethought.
Well, Hadaf, I want to put to you a couple of emails that we got, your impression or comments made by a couple of emails that we received. I'm going to read them back to you. The first one's from a viewer by the name of Hazan Baloch, who says, the words of writers and poets act as a mirror to their societies. They are bound to write on the problems of society to free people from stagnation. And the second email comes from the USA, from Ahmed Abdullah in Nebraska, who says, in the colonial era, poets and intellectuals inspired people to liberate their countries from oppression. No revolution can truly succeed without the intellectual elite. Now, I wonder, do you think it's that power of inspiration, Hadaf, that threatens oppressive regimes?
Well, I think that I think different arts, or even different literary arts, have different functions, and it's much easier to see the function of poetry in revolution and in rousing revolutions than it is, for example, to see fiction. But what fiction does as well, I think, is it keeps certain ideas alive, and it therefore keeps the ground fertile for revolutionary thoughts to take root. And I think that something that's really important in a revolution, and we saw it very much in the Egyptian revolution, is that people need to feel that they're not alone. And I think that it was that impetus when people came out on the streets and sort of recognized each other, and recognized that other people were coming out, and so on, that it all grew. And I think that art and fiction specifically do that. You read a passage and you recognize yourself in it, and you know that you're not alone, and you know that lots of other people are seeing and feeling the same thing. And it is, I think, in that sense that that it helps big social movements along.
Hisham Matar, I want to get to you an email question, if I may, that came in from Uganda, from Kampala. Moses Smith wrote in saying, communication is only possible with an unifying language. The revolutions of North Africa were achieved through these people's cultural common denominator, Arabic. Do you believe that's the case, that having a common language across all these countries has helped the so-called domino effect that's taken place across the Arab world?
Well, perhaps. I mean, I think also culturally, maybe the more, I mean, that's definitely a big part of it, is the language, but also more significantly, I think the culture and the experience of, the political experience in the Middle East has shares a lot of things in common. I am, though, slightly wary of the view that somehow writers are, fundamentally useful to a revolution. I think we serve a function just like a baker serves a function in a revolution. I don't think we're more important than that. Maybe even we're less important, far less important than a baker. And I see now in the Libyan revolution, it's a revolution that doesn't necessarily need writers. I feel, as a writer, I feel particularly useless during the revolution. And I'm also, I think, also wary of the opposing kind of view that is often romanticized in the West about sort of the writer under oppression and how somehow that state can, inspire deep and incredibly good, urgent works. I think, I don't see any evidence for that. I see evidence that oppression stifles literature, it stifles thought, it stifles education and intellectual discourse. And I think also it does it for the same reason that Ariel Dorfman said earlier on, that writers do in some way exist against oppression, that literature by its nature is rebellious, and it is interested in the multiplicity of life and in trying to understand and know the other, and it is filled with opposing currents of empathy, and so that doesn't flourish under an oppressive regime.
Let's get Ariel Dorfman's impression on this, and also I can put it in terms of a. I was going to put it in terms of a question to you as well, because it touches on this issue that's been raised. It came from Kenya, from a viewer by the name of Max Kabuya in Otaya in Kenya, who says, revolution requires a common mindset to unite the people of a country. Intellectuals must help in creating this space by feeding the hearts and minds of people with nobler aspirations. So, listening to what Hisham had to say, I wonder what your view is.
I worry about the word must, always. Because must is the word that people like Gaddafi use. You must do this, you must do that. No, I think, look, I had the following experience. When I was during the 3 years of Allende, I was very often very doubtful about what literature was actually accomplishing, because there was so much being baked, to use the metaphor we've just used. There's so much being baked. There was so much bread in the air. It then became really important to me when there was this